Where are the slides? Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here. I've been asked, I'm Yves Letem, I'm the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, and I've been asked to kind of set the scene for the discussion afterwards with, of course, a moderator and excellent panelists. And it's about aging un or equally, question mark. So in setting the scene, I think what will follow is kind of global knowledge and shared knowledge in terms of how demography is within the constituency of the OECD, the so-called mature economies. And basically the good news is the solid blue line, and the less good news is the dashed line. The good news being the fact that since 1970, on average, life expectancy has been growing to about 80 years. There's a gender problem, as you know, but still on average, male and female life expectancy now equals on average 80 years, while it was 70 only some 45 years ago. So that's kind of dividend of the economic development, which is very positive. The dark side of the problem is amongst others, the fertility rates that went down also in the mature economies, went down from 1970 to 2010-12, and it even still tend to go down, although we think they will stabilize. Besides that, there is at the right-hand side another graph that shows the average years that people live on their retirement, which basically was on average 13 years in 1970, and which, globally spoken, on average, once again, tends to be 20 years in 2012. And so you don't have to be a Nobel Prize winner to understand that there is a problem in terms, at least, not only in terms of societal sustainability, but at least in terms of fiscal, financial sustainability. Would it be that people would tend to work longer, which is unhappily not the case? There you see on this graph the employment rates by age groups, and you see that in the prime age workers group, there is a very high employment rate. Of course, it differs from the one country to the other, but globally spoken, we have an enormous, a very important part of the prime age workers that are really working, that are, from an economic point of view, productive, and that produce taxation income and social expenditure funding income for the social security schemes. Situation is worse when we go to the senior categories, generations from 60 to 64, or even 55 to 59, which is, of course, also a kind of problem you already are aware of, with differences from one country to the other. But there we see an enormous paradox, of course, with a higher life expectancy, people being a longer time of their life, they are healthy, they want to work, they have the skills and experience to work, but still on the labor market in mature economies, only a small part of them are really economically spoken active. So part of the solution, of course, could be to mobilize, to try to integrate those people in the labor market on a job so that they produce more income for Social Security. Another part of the problem could be, or from the solution could be, to lower allowances, but that's part of the debate we will have, and has an impact on aging equally or unequally. This is another very interesting gap. It shows the gender gaps in labor force participation in G20 countries in 2012, with at the extreme right-hand side of this slide, you see Saudi Arabia. That's the difference of 58% between male labor participation and female labor participation. On the other hand, you have Canada with the difference of only 7%. So a part of the solution could also be to mobilize, to integrate the female workers, the female labor force, to enhance, to strengthen the female labor force participation. And there you talk then about more possibilities for women to participate by a better combination between their family life and the professional life, goes through childcare policies, parental leave arrangements, and so on, workplace rules that make room for caregiving demands and allow for more flexibility in working conditions, and so on, and so on. Anyway, we think that, and this is to introduce, Mr. Moderator, the discussion, we think that at least these are 5 questions that are crucial. Well, not only the questions, but of course the answers to these questions are crucial to solve the problems we are facing, increasingly facing in terms of the aging of the population and high life expectancy. First of all is how we can prevent inequalities in income, worth and health from becoming compounded, so to say, to retirement, to the position of non-active, increasingly important group of non-active part of the population. Secondly, how we can ensure the financial and social fiscal sustainability of retirement income provision at the same time. Thirdly, what will the acute labor market problems faced by youth in many OECD countries mean for their future working lives and for retirement? Because we see that there is really a dramatic situation on the labor market with very high proportions of young people being unemployed, and this of course affects their whole career, their perspectives in their whole career, their income, their social security position, their retirement position. So how will these problems affect their future position as a retired person? Fourth question, what will be the most cost-effective measures to ensure that people can be employed in good health throughout their working lives? You know that competition puts a lot of pressure on working conditions. Competitiveness means also more efficiency, more effectiveness. So the workability and the employability of people is under pressure. And last but not least, as a last cluster of questions, is what can be the best policy responses to the growing long-term care needs. So that was about setting the scene for a discussion. I don't think I took more time than necessary, and I'll leave it up to you, Mr. Moderator, to moderate what I think will be a very interesting and fruitful discussion. For people that want to learn to know more in terms of our statistics and all we are doing in that field, in that domain, you can always go to the else component of the website of the organization, where you find, I hope, some answers on all your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General, Monsieur Le Terme. Great opening. And we can only hope that we can answer at least some of the questions that you've put there. And I think with the panel that we do have, I think we'll get most of those answers, if not many more, in fact. Just to introduce myself, my name is Shiv Malik. I'm the moderator for this session. I'm a journalist at The Guardian. I also wrote a book called Jilted Generation. That phrase doesn't translate very well into other languages, but it means the generation whose promises have been broken to them. And jilted is that one word that does it all. I will promise to speak slowly. Thank you. So let me just start with my own introduction. 5 months ago, I had a daughter. And with the many things that come with being the responsibility of a father, but also the sense that you're passing on something, came the realization that she would probably live to 100 years old. And I found myself filled with hope that she may witness a century worth of human endeavor, which is an amazing, amazing thought. Never really achieved on an average basis ever in human history before. But is such a long life a blessing? Or it can also be, is it just a blessing, or it can also be a curse in some senses? I fear that she might not live a healthy life, perhaps for maybe 20 years of the end of her life. God forbid, something like Alzheimer's may strike her. She may lose her mind, and it's happening to a lot of people currently. It's a very big and growing problem. She may have to work, in fact, unlike her grandmother, who's now almost retired at sort of coming up to 60, she may have to work till 80 or 90. We don't know what the pension situation will be. But surely I thought to myself, most of these problems 30, 40, 50 years from now will be sorted out. Well, in a way, we don't have to imagine that future. I think people knew that people would live this long about 30 years ago, and we haven't seemed to have sorted out the issues that come with that, and they are growing. We are living, in fact, in that great transition right now, right today. Probably one of the biggest issues we face as humanity, and it isn't talked about enough, perhaps, where older cohorts across the world are increasing in numbers. Today, there are 900 million people in the world aged over 60. By 2050, that number will have grown to 2.4 billion. Never in human history, as I said, have people lived so long. Welcome to the age of the aged. The effects on the individual are clearer, perhaps, than the effects on the society as a whole. We've always thought of older generations as sort of poor, because they're no longer in the workplace. But actually, in most OECD countries, that's not always the case. They're not always the poorest age cohort at all, in fact. Some of the OECD's work in 2010 and 11 found that, in fact, younger generations were more likely to be poor and in deeper deprivation than retired people for the first time in probably ever. They have assets. Older people in wealthier countries have assets, but will that always be maintained? Many women in OECD countries are not realizing also their full potential, despite the fact that we've had large advances in education and skills. The increasing participation of women could, in fact, in the workplace, bring on an average of 12% increase in GDP in OECD countries by 2030. But will it happen? But it's not just the effects on the economy, but what about also politics? So here's another question. As they tend to vote more and in greater numbers, will the demands of the old overtake the demands of younger people and workers? Why should this matter? Well, perhaps politicians eager to please older voters at the cost of investing will do so at the cost of investing in the future. So I hope that lays out some of the issues we hope to tackle. We have a monster-sized panel over here. But don't worry. It doesn't mean that we will be talking for a very long time. Hopefully we'll have lots of questions for the audience, and so this is how it will happen. We'll split the conversation into two parts. We're going to have a discussion with the panel. We're going to ask some questions, mainly concentrating on the issue, as I said, of aging and gender. And we're going to call out to the audience, and we're going to ask for your questions. Now, we also have a wonderful tool called Wissembly, which you have instructions for, I am told, in your chairs, around your chairs, near your chairs, with your neighbor. Someone has instructions. And you can basically tweet your questions using the hashtag #OECDGreen, as in we're in the green room here, which is much more pleasant than the red one, by the way. But my tie doesn't match, which is unfortunate. Or you can send your questions directly through the tool using other means, SMS. As I said, the instructions are there. Then we're going to come back to the panel. We're going to have a longer discussion then, a bit more of a discussion on the workplace and older people in the workplace and all those issues. And then we're going to come out for one final session with the audience where you're going to round up all of your complaints and angry issues and pleasant comments and all those things, and we're going to have a debate about all of that. So I'm going to ask the audience a question myself to start with. If we could bring up that question. I didn't ask, this question isn't my one as such. So this might anger some of the panelists, so apologies. But the question is this, and this is something that I want the audience to vote on. We're going to try and take a quick snap vote to start with. And the question is this. Who should have priority for resources? The old or the young? Can we have the question up on the screen? Am I seeing any nods? No, yes, yes, no. Do I have to do it? Okay, keep the question in mind. We're going to come to it in a bit. It'll pop up on the screen, I'm sure, at some point. But I'm now going to come to the panelists. Now, there we go. Look, it's popped up just when I thought it wasn't going to. So if you want to vote yes or no on that question, I can already see Deborah Whitman from the AARP getting very upset by this question. She's not. She's very relaxed. Okay, good. I'm going to come first to my first panelist. Mr. Katsutoshi Saito. He's the chairman of the Aichi Life Insurance Company, one of Japan's leading life insurance companies, which was founded as Japan's first mutual company in 1902, so it has a very long history. And it's just recently listed its shares on the Tokyo Stock Exchange in 2010. Japan has really been at the forefront of this issue of aging. Its population is increasingly much older than other populations around the world. How has Japan dealt with this issue? How has it reaped the rewards and also mitigated against the downsides, if there are any?
Thank you very much, Mike-san. Instead of answering your question directly, I would like to introduce Japan's situation. Japan has been dealing with these very challenges for quite a long time now. So let me explain very briefly Japan's situation. Japan's population is aging at a globally unprecedented pace. As of 2013, the share of those 65 or over was 25.1%, or 1 person in 4. By 2025, the figure is expected to reach 30.3%, and by 2060, the figure will probably be 40%, a level of super-aging that no country has ever experienced. Population aging accompanied by a working force shrinkage pulled down the potential growth rate, and it places greater burden on the social security systems. Increased social security costs are a major cause of Japan's fiscal deficit. And because of the declining birth rate, younger people must bear a heavier burden to keep the system solvent. These trends threaten the sustainability of the existing set of schemes. Countries in Europe and Asia will be experiencing a similar process of population aging after Japan. So sooner or later, they will confront the same sort of issues that Japan has already faced or expects to face in the near future. A report issued last year by the National Council on Social Security System Reform expressed Japan's determination to tackle the issue of population aging. The advanced longevity that today's Japanese enjoy is due in considerable measure to our nation's system of universal public health insurance. Maintaining this universal coverage must be one of the planks of the Social Security reform. Since the advance of aging among our senior citizens can be expected to cause rapid rise in medical and nursing care costs, we need to take steps to enhance the sustainability of our existing health insurance and long-term insurance systems. First, we must see to it that the financial burden of supporting these systems is shared among different generations in a manner consistent with their ability to pay. And we must rigorously prioritize benefits and enhance their efficiency. We should also seek to lengthen healthy life expectancy, focusing on initiatives to promote good health and prevent disease so that people can enjoy longer, healthy lives. This will improve people's quality of life, and it should also help control the rise in medical and nursing care costs. Efforts in this area are already underway. Business corporations have started to view employee health as a management issue. Some corporations have launched data health plans under which they analyze the result of regular physical checkups and records of visits to medical facilities to identify employees at high cost from their chronic illness and provide intensive guidance. In addition, the Japan Revitalization Strategy, the new growth strategy, encourage the development of new businesses that can help lengthen people's healthy life expectancy. It also bears noting that population aging can spark innovation. We see this in Japan with the moves to develop robots to support and care for seniors. Great advances have already been made in creating such robots, including the world's first internationally certified robot suit to help those with weak legs to walk. The Japanese market for senior support robots is expected to expand significantly over the coming years. Finally, Japan is now addressing the issue of population aging that other countries around the world will face in the years to come. In this sense, our country has been what we may call a problem pioneer. It is my hope and expectation that our initiative to tackle these issues will turn Japan into a solution pioneer. Thank you.
Thank you. That's absolutely fascinating. I didn't know that Japan was sort of using robots in this sense to help with social care. Who knew that that could happen? I'm going to ask you, you mentioned the fiscal strain is now being taken up by the young. How does Japan deal with that intergenerational imbalance, if you want? As in, are young people getting upset about this, or are they very happy to actually provide for older people?
Well, as a matter of fact, as a percentage of GDP, the level of benefits provided for families and children is the fourth lowest in the OECD. By contrast, the level of benefits provided for senior persons is fourth highest in the OECD. So there is a lot of disparity. But now, ongoing social security reform includes a commitment to making people of all ages eligible for benefit and services, and includes measures that will narrow the disparities between generations. So things are moving in the right direction at this moment.
And you're in the life insurance and pensions industry. How are younger people saving now for retirement that will take into account that they will live till 80, 90, 100? And also, why 30 years ago wasn't this problem sorted out by companies like yourself? Well, okay, we should ask people to save more if they're going to live so much longer.
Well, to be quite honest, we private life insurance companies, of course, deal with the pension. But before that, we would like to. We don't want to criticize the sustainability of the public pension system. So first of all, we should,
Why don't you want to criticize it?
Well, to be quite honest, we are not acting as a leading role. The public pension system should act leading role. So what is important is to enhance the sustainability of the public pension system.
Okay. I sense almost that you might want the public purse to take the strain instead of the private purse. Am I wrong? But maybe we'll come back to that. I don't know. Deborah Whitman, you are... hang on. You're the Executive Vice President in Policy and Strategy and International Affairs at the AARP. And for those who don't know what the acronym used to mean or represents, it's the American Association of Retired Persons. Can I ask you, just on a very basic level, this label of over 65s, is that now completely outdated? What we perhaps have is now the old, the older, and the very old. Is that a better description?
I think 90 is the new 40 in some ways, and it's really not about one's age. It's more about one's health and one's physical capacity. You can have a very healthy 90-year-old, or you can have a very unhealthy 40-year-old, and the differences are not necessarily by age. I want to go back to the question that you had posed to the crowd, because I think in a conference where we're talking about inequality, to say that $1 goes to a child or $1 goes to an older person sort of expands that notion of inequality rather than looking across the whole lifespan. I have a 9-year-old daughter, you have a new daughter. We both hope that they will grow and thrive, and one day that the policies that protect them when we are old will also be there for when they're old. So it isn't really a choice of $1 here or $1 there in my mind.
So that's a very interesting way of take on it. Actually, should we get the results up? Because I saw a flash of results. Look, so there we go. So of those who have voted so far, do we know? Can you just shout out how many people have voted so far? You don't know yet. No, you usually do. Okay, but anyway, the split is there. So far, if we do take the question as it is.
And give us a handicap for the number of younger people who are quicker to tweet. So maybe those numbers overrepresent.
So that was the first panel I did on engagement and older people. So okay, so let me ask you then this, which is, look, you said, but we're protecting the policies for when my daughter becomes 65. But in the UK's case and across the world, actually people are being asked to work longer than ever. Mm-hmm. And actually in jobs that are less secure than they used to be. Has the AARP, as a proponent of very healthy social security spending on the old, actually been part of the problem? I'll finish it so it doesn't sound so rude. In that, actually, what's not being done, if you take that $1 here, $1 there, actually the $1 here and the $1 there is not a tussle between a baby and a retired person. It's between the future and future investment and what can be given to people right now, you know, to take them through basic spending.
So let me be clear, that ARP membership is from age 50. So we have workers paying taxes as well as pensioners taking out benefits. So we not only look after the interests of the 50 plus, but also of future generations. So I just want to be clear of who it is that I represent. And I don't think it's still a dichotomous choice. We do want many people, and many people want for themselves, to work longer, to remain engaged in the workforce, to have a reason to get up in the morning and a contribution to society. There's also a large number of older people that need to continue work just to make ends meet. You had talked about the social protections for old people, but the U.S. Social Security system on average only pays $13,000 a year. And that's not a lot if you live in New York City or Washington, D.C., where I live. So it's not a very generous benefit. The issues around aging in the United States are less about our pension system and more about our abysmal healthcare system, which is overly costly. And there's, even though it is overly costly, there's a lack of coverage for long-term care, which I saw was one of the questions.
We might come back to these issues, but and the audience might want to ask their own questions. Let me just ask you, on that first question about the different categories of the elderly. We do know that there's going to be a very elderly block of women in the world, if you want, and especially in developing, women outlive men by a number of years. Just what are they like? Do we know anything about what this group may be like in the future, what it is like now, how they tend to contrast to elderly men?
So I think importantly that the current older cohort was less likely to have a job. The future older cohort worked for a period of time, but they took time out of the labor force, so they'll have lower social security. They often worked in jobs that didn't provide a pension. They sometimes got divorced, and so they may not have had the coverage of a spouse, even if there was one at one point in their history. So in addition to living longer, they've saved less, earned less, and are more likely to be relying solely on Social Security. So the issues around the aging of women, I think, are of particular importance for society because these are the people who've cared for children. They're caring for their adult parents and aunts and uncles. And we don't really have a system that's developed, at least in the United States, to protect them.
Thank you. Ulf Christensen, you're the Minister for Social Security in Sweden. You're a politician. How has, I'm sure you have to then therefore balance all of these calculations between future investments, yesterday's and today's spending. How do you do this? And do you have these debates around the Swedish cabinet about how you spend? Sweden's obviously generally famed for its good, healthy social security provisions. How does this come up at the cabinet table? Tell us what the Prime Minister says.
That's a secret.
Okay.
No, it comes up every Thursday morning, actually, more or less, because it's it's everything we discuss is actually in the very center of what you were saying. Is this an investment for the future, or are we spending something for good or for bad reasons right now? But one point I would like to make is that old people, in the sense, old people not primarily working, supporting themselves, and thereby dependent on pensions. They might be private or they might be public, but basically depending on schemes from different kind. They are not only old people; they are also parents and they are grandparents. And my impression or my experience is they care a lot about other things than only their own pensions. So I mean, of course, I really respect the AARP or the Swedish counterparts for basically promoting better pensions and fighting against lowering pensions. But my experience is that they care for a lot more issues as well.
How is Sweden then dealing with that, the fact that it will cost more? Have you now? Norway famously has their fund, the Statsolie Pensionsfond, which is very generous and will hopefully, they say, not just provide for pensions today, but also for almost every Norwegian in future coming years. That's just the interest of their state fund. Did Sweden make any provision like that? Don't we all wish that we'd made provision like that? But how are you?
We didn't only lose Norway; we lost the oil as well.
Yes, rats. Yes.
So, but we didn't know that at the time. I think there is a historic lesson. There is an historic lesson to learn here. When we introduced our very first pension scheme or pension system in Sweden, that was exactly 101 years ago, 1913. It was pretty late, actually. Bismarck in Germany was, as you know, he was a more rapid guy than the Swedes. Nevertheless, we introduced the pension age of 67 in a society where the average life expectancy was 59. So that
pretty
means
cruel then.
That simply means, the risks for the kind of public funding was quite limited, honestly. And to say even more, it was in a very exact sense, it was an insurance against the very limited risk of becoming old. Nowadays, the situation is totally different. And I see no real alternative to the very simple one. If we live longer, we either have to spend more years earning money, or we have to save a lot more than we do today.
Then this brings me to that point where, hang on, what we have now is the transition. But the people, there's going to be a group of people, we could call them the baby boomers, other people who will be able to retire still at 65, generally speaking. That's the contract they've had. But they're actually going to be the people also living very much longer than their parents before them. And they're going to get this wonderful boon. Are we going to, and the people after them are expected to actually know you will be working till 80 or 70, at least. That seems A, unfair, and B, in fact, well, I'll ask you the second part of that question in a second. But isn't that unfair?
Well, it underlines the need for having a sound pension system. You're not allowing one generation to pick all the money out and leave. So, I mean, if it underlines something, you need to have some kind of fairness in a very literal sense, economic fairness built into the system. And I think quite a few countries nowadays are redesigning their pension schemes to be more fair, but also to be more sustainable in this very specific sense.
Let me just flip that question around then, which is say, well, hang on. If there are going to be we've all heard about, in many different ways, growing inequality. And isn't one of the ways of which ordinary people can get some benefit from the process of globalization, from increased productivity? If they're not wealthy as workers, well, hang on, let them retire, give them their time. So why aren't we flipping this on the head? Why are we forcing, as countries, people to work even longer? Why don't we actually make the reward, you can retire?
I think you actually avoid one thing. And I know this is not accurate for everybody, but there is a growing part of the workforce, a growing part of people in most developed societies, where work is not only something bad you do simply to be able to live, but work is a part of a good life. And I would say that baby boomers, I mean, they've been influential since I was a kid, and they have been wrong a lot of time, I know that. But now they actually contribute with something extremely healthy. They contribute by saying, hey guys, we can still work. And we want to work. We want to we don't want to leave the labor market. And I think they are the showcase right now to tell a lot of people that you can do perhaps differently. When I visited the ARP a few years ago, you told me that, reinvent yourself. Do something else. Don't do what you have done the last 30 years, but do things you would like to do, and there you might have some skills.
Just finally, older people can obviously be both caregivers, I think you've already alluded to this, and receivers. So they can be people who babysit, in my case, my daughter, but also it might mean that I have to, in return, look after, or other people have to look after my my parents. How do welfare systems encourage a good balance?
That is really a tricky question. I would say it is as tricky for the welfare systems as it is for most individuals, because there is a lot of of nuances, a lot of trade-offs, a lot of bad compromises or good compromises, and dilemmas built into this. I think one very simple consequence would be that a lot of people who have been working for many years, now having kids in the midst of their career and having grandkids, they want to have a combination. They want to stick to doing something meaningful in the professions, but they want to spend more time with their kids, for example. And I think it actually ends up into something very simple but complicated: flexibility from individuals and from employers and from public welfare schemes as well.
Before I go to my next panelist. I'm just going to remind you that we are going to go there now, after that, to questions. So please do get your questions prepared. I can see, they're coming in on my iPad here. And we can do it the old-fashioned way as well. You can just put up your hands and someone with a mic will come to you. So do get them ready. So my fourth panelist, I'm going to come to Yukako Uchinaga-san. She's the president of Japan's Women's Initiative Network. It's a non-profit organization that promotes diversity in the workplace. Can I ask you, women have generally been the main source of caring for both children and the elderly. How do countries balance gender roles in that respect? How do we get to a better balance?
Okay, before answering to your questions, I would like to ask the staff to show my presentation chart.
Yes,
Is
can
that
we
okay?
put the chart up, if that's okay? It could take a few seconds, so...
Yeah, this chart shows the, mainly just to summarize the Saito-san's talking about the Japan's demographics. But this chart shows the very important message, not only for elder people, but also including women. So that's why I would like to ask to show. Yeah, this is just the population trend, and the bottom line is the message is until the 2050, the one young people has to take care. Excuse me, one elder people should be taken care by 1.3 young people. So that's the same one which the Saito-san already mentioned. Going to next.
Can you put the next slide up?
Yeah, this is also the demographics structure of the age. And maybe you can see in Japan, unfortunately, the growing population from the age point of view is only 75 over people is increasing. So then even 65 is almost flat, even 2050. And the younger is shrinking down. So that's the situation.
So just so it's absolutely clear, at the bottom of this population pyramid at 2015, we have the younger people, and it goes up with age to the top. Now, in a healthy country, fiscally, where it's easy at least to support social security systems, you'd want a pyramid, yeah?
But it's a reverse.
Now, when you get to 2050, it turns out that it's top heavy.
Right,
so
right.
Okay.
And also that over 75 age is only zone which is increasing the population. So others is decreasing, right? Next chart, please. So this chart just to summarize the population's demographic status. And so over 65 and over 18 is the second line, and under is younger people. And gray in the upper 65 is the people who has to take the cares, so caretakers populations. And also that A area is over 65, but they are willingly to work. And in Japan, even the age is getting higher and higher, it's getting older, but more than 70% people, they really want to contribute to the business, even the senior age. So then if they are healthy, and if they can get some job, they are willingly to work. But right now, unfortunately, that kind of the opportunity or job matching is not successfully done yet. And also that the A- means that people has to take care, the caretakers, senior people, right? So then the full-time worker, if they have a job, is A zone, which is over 65. And also C is the age is from 18 to 65, but C areas people is they have to take care of the elderly. So in Japan, and based on some research, about until the 2016, about 16% of the full-time workers has to take care their parents or some others for elderly people. So then they cannot work as a full-time. They have to take care of the senior people. And also C- means that they have to take care of the children. So then B area is people who can contribute or who can enjoy the business as a full-time work. And then these A and B is only resources which we can use in Japan as the business workers. But A is over 65 and B is 18 to 65, but it's coming from male and female. And unfortunately, in case of the female, the percentage of the full utilized as a worker is only 40%. So then the bottom line message is clear. In order to sustain the business growth in Japan, in order to grow the economic situation in Japan, we have to utilize A, B, we don't care male and female, that's number one. And number two is A-, C, and C- people, even they have some limitations for the full-time work because of the caregivers or the child care. They should get some flexibility to do some business in the business environment. Unfortunately, in Japan, most of the working style is a full-time, from early morning to the midnight, and they are just working for long time hours. So that kind of things also cause many problems for the A and the C people. So they want to contribute, they want to do the business, they want to work in the business society, but because of this kind of the working style, they cannot contribute. So we have to change working style. We have to be much more flexible working environment in Japan. That's the most important, not only for the senior and also caregivers people, but also for the female.
Will Japanese men get involved in care in the same ratio that women will?
Excuse me?
Will Japanese men get involved with caring for children and for their parents?
Yes, even male is now getting involved in this situation, but still the working situation in Japan is a full-time, long hours working style, so then they have to give up some careers. And also sometimes they give up to the company, so they leave the company because of these kind of the limitation. So right now, about 100,000 employees leaving the company annually because of these kind of the caregivers. So then it's not only for the women's issues, but also the men's issues.
So why don't employers see that there's this big issue, that they could be pulling upon so many more workers if they were just a little bit more flexible? What's the issue?
Okay, that's the answer I would like to understand. But based on my experience, maybe I should ask to Saito-san. My background is I worked for IBM 37 years. So my nature is purely the kind of the global company's working style. So that I'm so flexible. I can work anytime, any place, and I don't care the location, whatever. That kind of the work style, I did it. But in Japan, most of the company, they did not implement such kind of things. Why? The reason I would like to say this is a very, very strong monoculture environment. And maybe my point is too strong, but job descriptions for one individual, not clear. And also that the workflow process and the decision process, not clear. So in such kind of the situation, I think the flexible work environment is very difficult because evaluation systems is depend on long time working result. So then in order to change, I think it's not only for the senior or the caregivers, employees, but also for the women. We have to change, in Japan, we have to change the working style to clarify the individual job responsibility and to clarify the work process and to clarify the decision process. That kind of things is very important. Once we can do these kind of things, I believe the white workers and the back office productivity of Japan will be drastically improved. That is my impression.
Very quickly then, before we got to audience questions, Saito-san, so you're an employer, aren't you? How many people do you employ, roughly?
We have about 60,000 employees.
Why aren't you flexible?
Well, I think our company is reasonably flexible, and as a matter of fact, several years ago, Japan introduced, implement a law which get employees to take care leave to take care of their families. And the problem is that although the law was implemented, the percentage of taking that caregiver holiday is only 16%. So what is to do is to get this law known among people, or the company itself should inform this law much more to their employees. As far as our company is concerned, we have we have informed this law to the employees.
Oh, we've got a response. Oh, yes, very quickly, very, very quickly, because we've got to go to the audience.
Okay.
They're waiting.
In case of the Saito-san's company, I know very well. And they are doing the promoting the diversity very well. So from that point, and Saito-san's company is now implementing such kind of things. But because of the company is so big, I think that takes a little bit time. But in Japan, and even we are now promoting the flexible work environment or work style, but most of the women or the men who are now chasing the careers, they don't want to take such kind of the work style because the measurement system is not tightly linked to the result of their achievement.
Thank you. Okay, so questions from the audience. Do we have any hands up? Hands up, because if not, we've got a few. I'm going to read some out from here as well. Could we go to the lady over there? Yes, that's her. Thank you.
Do I need to introduce myself? Or
very briefly, and keep your question brief also.
Very brief, yeah. Yes, my name is Helena Bruce, and I'm a retired member of ARP. Pushed out of the company prematurely, I think, and idle for 5 years, but I spent 20 years trying to bring the industry to the OECD and use the OECD for help in solutions in healthcare and aging problems. And I believe in the OECD work, and my question, first of all, I agree very strongly with what Deborah Whitman said, that you cannot classify people according to the calendar age. And this is not reflected by our pension systems and in any other way. And my question very briefly to the OECD, to the Deputy Secretary General, since I've been absent, and we've talked about it many times, whether the OECD which is so influential in influencing individual countries' policy, and I have many examples, whether you are doing any work in trying to show how different is distribution of older people in terms of health and also financial resources, whether this kind of work is ongoing, because my belief has always been that if you looked at the distribution, if you could have an index of the status of older people, you would see an enormous distribution around the means in terms of health status, and that perhaps would lead to changes in our pension and health insurance policy?
Okay, thank you. That's actually a very interesting question, which I think is summed up by Bradley Sherman. Is he here? Schurman? Yes? Okay, so you tweeted, or you asked this question. It's not so much about age. Actually, it wasn't a question. It was summing up Deborah, wasn't it? It's not so much about age. It's about physical condition. Does anyone want to talk about, yes, Deborah, go on. Physical condition really is at the center of all of this.
It really is, and actually, I don't want to criticize the first slides that came up, but it showed average life expectancy increasing. But we look at the average, and it's missing the entire distribution. If I get on the subway in the suburbs in Maryland and ride all the way into the District of Columbia, the average life expectancy from where I live and where I work is 7 years difference. 7 years difference. And even in the United States, we're seeing falling life expectancy by education. So white women without a high school education have lost 5 years of life expectancy within the last 2 decades. So we need to look at how all of the compounding, and I think this was a good question that you had posed, the compounding of the struggles that you face throughout your life will also face you as you age. And these are the issues that we really need to talk a lot more about, and not just look that everybody is equal, everybody has the same opportunities at a given age.
I've got a question from here, from the audience. I don't think it's unnamed. Economic dependency ratio versus the demographic dependency ratio. What is more important? Which should play a more prominent role in the aging debate? Which is, are we sort of putting people, you might want to put it this way, are we putting people before economic sustainability, or vice versa? Which one really should take? Well, why don't we ask the minister here, given that that's your day job?
Economic dependency versus, demographic dependency.
Yes. So I think what the question is trying to get at is that obviously there's that relationship that as people are getting older, you're going to be pulling on more of an economic dependency.
But isn't the first thing to just to mention is that, I mean, demographics, on the one hand, you cannot negotiate with demographics. That is, if you have a raising life expectancy, even though unevenly distributed, you have low or even decreasing birth rates, you have a lot of countries with big reluctance or resistance towards immigration, then you have a true demographic problem, which you cannot simply talk around. But then you have to do changes in policy to be able to manage it. But I mean, having said that, you can simply say that more people living longer, more people being healthy, creates possibility for more people being economically active, and creates resources to help people who, in these more diverse situations, actually not take so much benefit of the average increases.
Do we have one more question? Yes, from the, let's go to the lady at the front over here. I know the gentleman at the back over there. We're going to come back out for more questions, but let's just get this one in.
Thank you for your talk today. I have a healthcare background, so my question's therefore quite specific. Would you be able to talk to me a bit about how you think nations should be tackling preventative healthcare in line with the pensions problem we're seeing, and from your experience, what makes it work best? How do nations manage both of these really important issues well in terms of communication?
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Who wants to take that question? Preventative healthcare. What are nations doing about it? Saito-san, do you want to say, or Uchinaga-san, do you want to speak to that? Deborah's looking like she wants to answer that question. Okay, go on.
I'll take it if nobody else will.
Okay.
One of the big changes in the United States with Obamacare and the expansion of healthcare was to reduce or to go to zero the cost for preventive services within Medicare, which is the program for older people. Obviously, we want to prevent illness and keep people as healthy as long as possible, and I think that was the discussion, is then they are more active, then they're more able to contribute. And the more we can pour money into those types of programs that actually help people through smoking cessation, through diabetes prevention, all of those things can pay off in spades over the long term.
Okay, you'll have noticed that there are a number of panelists who haven't actually spoken at all yet. And they're not just here to just sit there, obviously. We're going to move to them to ask them about this second part. In February, someone called Run Shaw died. He was, if you don't know, a major philanthropist, but also set up Shaw Brothers Film Studios. He died in February at the age of 106. So pretty old. I think everyone would agree that's pretty old. But he happened, Shaw Brothers were famed for kind of their both martial arts films, and they put out 1,000 films or something like that over the company's life. But he only retired at 104. And he apparently went to the office every single day until that age. So he had 3 years of retirement at the end of his life, if you want. Is this now some... we're going to talk about the labour market and the older generation. Is this some vision of the future? As I said, is my daughter going to be working till she's 90 or 100? Who knows? I don't. The panelists hopefully do. Herman Neyens is CEO of Randstad Recruitment Agency in Belgium, which he joined in 1988. So you've been with them a very long time.
Already, yes.
Indeed.
Actually.
Right, already. I see. You intend to carry on then. Okay, no surprise announcement. Now, your job is obviously to recruit people into the market. What are you seeing? You mentioned actually over the phone in one of our discussions, you said something which I'll pose as a question. Are the over 50s too expensive? Now, you said that they might be to maintain in the labour market.
Actually, in Belgium they are. But that... I would like to, come back on the general issue, and that's that if your daughter was born in, let's say, 100 years ago, 2014, let's say now 1914,
okay.
How long do you think she would have lived?
I'm guessing probably about on average, but sort of 60?
About that, I think. I think OECD has the right... studies to say, but what I would try to say is there's a lot of misperception in the happiness we have in living longer, because actually we live longer and we'll have to work longer. That's more or less what also my Swedish colleague said, but we're also going to consume longer. So I think what we have to do is try to really manage the perception of aging people and their advantages they'll bring to the society. Because what I see is that even in this crowd, where I think a lot of experts are in the room, that 65% of them thinks that older people crowd out the younger people from the labor market. That's what I saw in the graph. That's not true. If you look at the studies OECD still did somewhere 2013, I guess, it's not true. Older people can work simultaneously together with the younger people. Sweden is the best example. They employ older people and they also have a low, let's say, youth unemployment. I think what we should do is focus much more on, let's say, the advantages and the empowerment of the older people. I think what we should do is protect less and empower more by training them, by also looking at re-education, by also looking at which kind of talents we need in the future, and also train people after their 50s, because that's what we also see, that people aren't trained after 50, 55. They stop being developed also by their company. So I think that's one of the most important messages I would like to bring. And the cost is only a minor issue, because if you look at the expertise, if you look at the experience which people bring to the table, I think that can be regained in productivity, in innovation, in everything which is important for a company, not only now but also in the future.
Can the over 50s, and that might not even be the right label to use, act also as entrepreneurs? We sometimes have this vision or stereotype that it's the young people who start up businesses, and they often do. Facebook, something like this on social media. But at the same time, actually, older people are much more experienced at what they do, and they also have assets and capital which they can draw upon to start new businesses. In your experience, are they acting as entrepreneurs? Are we seeing more of entrepreneurial over 50s?
I agree. Let's say it's there's a difference, because when you mention entrepreneurs, it's mostly the high-skilled people who are fired or laid off by a company, which we see that in our outplacement business, for example, that they start up their own company with their own expertise. We don't see that much in blue-collar skilled workers, for example. That's not the case.
And just another vision of the future, presumably 20, 30 years hence, will be that you have 70, 80-year-olds in the workplace alongside 20-year-olds. How has anyone done any work, I don't know, on how that might pan out? Will it cause tension? Will it be actually a wonderful thing in every capacity? I mean, how will these things meld? How will the generations come together?
As usual, but perhaps also that's what Deborah Whitman told. As usual, you have to have let's say, a whole scale of people, not only young people, but also experienced older people. And I think that the success is that having a diverse, but also talented population of every kind of talent, which are older people, younger people, but also female, male. I think you should have a quite diverse, let's say, scale of all of your people working for your company. And that diversity will pay off for the future.
So are employers actually doing this?
I have to say some of them are already, but we as a staffing company, we notice that there are still a lot of misperceptions and prejudice against older workers and against diversity in the in the working environment.
Like what?
Well, we fight against it, and we try to take away those prejudices, but it's still a long way to go, I fear.
Just what are those prejudices?
For example, that people who are older are less flexible, while as we see that people who are older are more flexible sometimes than the younger people who have to go to have to go home to pick up their kids, for example. So we see that the people who are older are they are more stable than the younger people are, because they choose not only for a career, but they also choose coming from their own talents and coming from their own, let's say, motivation and interest.
I'm just going to move to my next panel. The Minister wanted to say, do you want to say something very briefly, only very briefly, because we've got two other panelists.
Very briefly, we actually asked a senior medical researcher in Sweden to make a government inquiry on this specific issue on old age discrimination. And she ended up in the conclusion, I would want to take her results in, but the conclusion, it's all about low expectations. So age discrimination in Sweden 2014 is not a judicial issue. It is young people in the workplace and older people in the workplace agreeing on the fact that the old ones do not have to learn Office. Okay. The new Office package of the computer. And that's a main part of the story, actually.
So my next panelist is Mateja Kožu-Novak. She's the president of Slovenian Federation of Pensioners Organizations since 2004. And you're also a former politician, yes. Which I like, which is very interesting, so I can throw that into the mix. Actually, do you want to follow up on some of this, aspects of discrimination? And I'm going to ask you some more specific questions.
Yeah, my colleague, who is specialist in occupational medicine, she told me actually that older workers are much more stable workers than young workers. They are much more devoted to their companies than young workers. They have much less days of sick leaves than younger workers. And they make more mistakes than younger workers, but they are not fatal mistakes. While younger workers make less, but they are fatal mistakes. And they have
it's one way to end life expectancy.
They have less working accidents. So, you know, you asked to whom you should invest. Actually, in my country, which is a small Eastern European country, Slovenia, it doesn't matter, actually. If you give to younger population and take to older population, then old depend in the most difficult ages. When they die, depend on the money of younger population. So if you take to one part and give to another one, you didn't do anything. So actually, it should be balanced. And I'm many times, you know, in my countries, they try to solve unemployment with early retirement. Many people were forced to be retired. And we have so big force of retired people who are under 70. And no one can use them. They don't use them. They just push, they say to us, you know, just sit down and wait, what will we give you? Instead of using skills and knowledge of older population. As you said, give us less protection, but more possibilities to be involved again in the society. And take in account that actually young people wouldn't survive in your intensive labor time if we wouldn't take care for your kids when they are sick and when they are not in kindergartens. So society, if we would like to survive as a society, we should actually respect each other. And please don't say that that's disaster, that we are all aging. You know, if you say we will invest in a young population now, you shouldn't forget that tomorrow you will be old. So what else you will do now for against older people, younger generation than you, will do much worse for you when you will be old. So please, let's think all the time as a society composed by children, middle-aged generation, and older people, and we will live much easier, and we'll all have better quality of life. Thank you.
I'm very glad that got an applause, but, and he says but, I wanted, I'm not going to allow you to get away with that quite so easily, because there is a tension there, isn't there, between, okay, so let me just give you the situation in the UK very briefly, which is that, and we've got to go back to the audience for more questions, and we have one last panelist to speak. But if the situation in the UK is that they've tripled university tuition fees, they don't build any more houses for young people, and all sorts of other things are visited upon young people for austerity, right? So, oh, we've got to cut back, no more youth clubs, this, that, the other. Older people, on the other hand, have had all of their benefits certified, nothing will change, their pensions remain the same. In fact, they've gone up. In fact, pensioners are wealthier now than 5 years ago, before the crisis. Younger people are far, far poorer. Now, you may say, well, okay, we'll all be old one day. Yes, that's certainly true, and it's even truer than before. We're going to be even older than ever before. But if you don't invest in young people now, and invest in things like infrastructure and railways and all those other things, I mean, the list goes on, then what happens to those old people when they're older? Well, they end up with a life that's worse off, don't they?
Sure, you have to invest. I didn't say that you shouldn't invest in young people.
No, but there's a trade.
But happy UK old people, because in my country, older people are less and less well provided for. Even if, you know, Slovenia is unique, beside, I think, Slovak Republic, 80% of older population are owners of flats or houses. But those houses and flats are for children. So the government should be much more flexible to actually find small, warm, flats in the basement, not in the basement, in the
ground floor.
Ground floor
Not in the
for
basement.
older people that they could give their children their houses and their flats. We don't need new flats. We have too many flats at present because economy is not working. But somehow government, any government in last 20 years, they are not flexible enough to assist families, you know, to have younger and older, better way of life.
What I'm getting is a theme of employers and governments just aren't flexible enough, clearly. That's actually, I mean, it's probably a very serious problem in that respect. I was going to ask you another question, but we're running out of time. I'm going to go to, and we've got a final panelist who's been waiting very patiently, which is somewhat ironic because he comes from Google, a very fast-paced company. His name is Shinichi Abe, and he's the managing director, no less, enterprise business at Google Japan. So we fascinatingly heard a glimmer of robots being used in social care. I'm not going to ask you about robots in social care, but I am going to ask you what you think that technology can bring to the table, hopefully, presumably, to solve these issues.
Japan experienced a big earthquake and a big disaster 3 years ago. And Google was a part of an initiative called Innovation Tohoku to help out the people in the affected area. And we did a kind of a cloud matching, connecting people struggling to recover and people willing to help people out. And the interesting one, what I found interesting was young generation in Tohoku was helped by the aged people outside Tohoku area. And I think that's a good example how technology can add values in an aging society, in that aged people could reclaim a sense of active participation in society again, the retired gentlemen and women. And in the meantime, young people had an opportunity to get skill transfers from aged people. And as we discussed earlier, that's something we can make our society more sustainable. That's a kind of social investment infrastructure we need to have in place. We have a good infrastructure, railways, road, and so forth in developed countries, but not necessarily in knowledge management, wisdom management. But by connecting people on cloud services, we can actually share information, wisdom, and knowledge over the internet. And that's going to be a lasting, intangible intellectual property for good. And more importantly, aged people are flexible and sometimes inflexible. And likewise, that's the case with women too. But cloud will be providing ability to make work style more flexible, enabling part-time work or like a full-time work, of course, so that they can work anytime, anywhere, and with anybody. That's something technology can bring to society.
I think we've definitely all seen how you can be contacted and people can work from many locations. But is there in the last sort of 10 years it's become really? I can send an email from the Paris Metro, not on the London Underground. Thank God, I need a break. But what, in a sense, two bits of this. First is, what more are we going to see of this? Will employers also be more receptive? We've heard a bit about inflexibility in Japan, inflexibility with governments generally. But then also the digital natives. What happens when those guys grow up in 50 years' time? What's the future going to look like? Tell us the future. Cliched question. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. I think the key is cloud, as you know, as we do, services we are familiar and very popular services for its high population of users. So, but in the meantime, as a mature society or mature business corporations, especially for intellectual workers, our work style hasn't changed much. It's something from like back to 3 decades. But like as we mobilize social or search or map services on daily lives, we can use those technology even in a business context. That's gonna help connect younger generation and business people, and that would possibly address skill shortage and make possible more flexible work style. And also, that's gonna help us, as I mentioned earlier, work from anywhere, anytime. And we don't have to worry about like borders or time and so forth. And we can share information online without sending email attachments back and forth because all information is with them on like a cloud and internet.
Well, that sounds very positive indeed. I almost want to get old right now and participate in this new world. So questions from the audience. I'm just going to read a few things out. If you could put your hands up while I'm doing that, that would be great. And then we can come to you. So surviving as a society requires respect across generations. You may be young today, but you will be old tomorrow. Here's a good question. Is the problem not our fixation on youth is best? Should we not be capitalizing on older populations' knowledge? Who wants to come in on that? So I'll read it again. Aging, do we have a fixation with youth is best? And should we be capitalizing on older people's knowledge? Mate?
Actually, I don't understand the question quite. Should we take in respect the knowledge of older people? Yes, we should, if I understood correctly. That I am always complaining in my government that the knowledge and the experiences of older people are taken as waste, or how do you say wastage? Yeah. Instead of using it for the faster progressing of the country. That's stupidity, which we older population, especially in post-socialistic world, where younger generations take us as old communists who didn't do anything. That's such big stupidity, which diminishes the success of our countries, and that should be taken in account. You know, we studied, we worked 40 years, and we really have a lot of things and examples to give to younger generations.
Question from the from a woman over here with the scarf. There was a question from the gentleman at the back at one point. We've only heard from women so far, so we've got a gender imbalance the other way. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Rachel, and I work for a large Japanese company. And I have a question exactly to your point. We're talking about lack of flexibility or rigidity in the labor market. How much of this problem is due to good old-fashioned sexism, at least in the developed, mature economies? Because from what I can see, the sexism works on multiple levels. I mean, number one, when you look at the countries that have a rapidly aging population and a declining birth rate, it's Japan, it's Italy, it's Spain, it's countries that have a very entrenched role for women that is not flexible on a gender level. And then at the same time, you talk about retraining workers when they're 50, 60 years old, becoming consultants and experts in a different field. Yet, if you are a woman in Japan, you know, where in large corporations in Japan, only 3% of managers are women, 3%. and you face enormous pressure to drop out of the career force as soon as you have a baby. You've been out of the career force for 30, 40 years, and you're going to try to go back? It just doesn't work. So, I mean, how can we address the fundamental issue of sexism that underlies so much of the debate on aging?
Uchinaga-san, do you want to take that? Good old-fashioned sexism, that's the issue, and now it's just being dressed up in kind of an aging debate?
Okay, so thank you very much. This is exactly the big issue right now in Japan. But right now, the Prime Minister Abe, he put a very strong focus to utilize women more effectively, not because of the gender issues, because of the business growth. So I think it's a right strategy, and many Japanese companies now putting a very strong focus on utilizing the women's capability. And then in order to increase the management positions and so on for women, right now we have the three issues. The one is, unfortunately, we do not have enough role models. So that's why the women could not realize what kind of the position would be available for them. So it's very tough for them to get the very strong mindset to growing up the careers. So that's number one. Number two is, which I already mentioned, work-life balance. So as I said, in Japan, maybe you already know, in Japanese company, it's a long working hour culture is a very big barrier for women, especially when she has to take care of the baby. So, but right now, this kind of things also now changing. Still, it takes time. And what Saito-san already mentions, many Japanese top companies now starting to implement the work process clarifications, and also the many flexible working style, that kind of thing is starting. Last one, the big issue for women is old boys network. It's a big issue right now. But when I make these kind of the issues clearly to the Japanese company, they are now getting understanding, especially last issues for the old boys network. I know that it takes time, but because of the pressure from the outside of the Japan, and also very strong passion of the women's, and also the business environment, I think from now on to until the 2020, I think that the women's management ratio will be drastically increased. That we should do this. If not, I think it's a very tough for Japan. It's not only for the gender, but also from the age point of view. So thank you very much for your address. And we are now trying to resolve, and I need your help. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have all got an hour and a half older, obviously, during this panel, but we are now 2 minutes overdue our finishing point. If you could, so we're going to if you could thank finally Monsieur Le Terme for his presentation, and also the panelists, and I do hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you found it very informative. So thank the panelists and Monsieur Le Terme. Thank you very much.